struggle with. So the first thing that I want to say is that most of us multitask, and multitask is a myth. It's not something that we do naturally in our brains. And it's important for us to understand this because if we're going to talk about prioritizing, we have to talk about organization. They go hand in hand. Um, and what happens a lot of times for people with ADHD in terms of prioritizing is you can make the brain dump of the things you have to do, but you struggle to order them. Everything seems equally important. And so, what we want to do today is help you set up a strategy for doing the things you need to do and helping you get them done. So I want to say, as I said, something a little bit about multitasking. So we all live with an information overload. We multitask, we do email, we talk on the phone, we read, we drive, we eat, all at the same time. But multitasking doesn't really exist in our brains. In fact, it slows productivity. It changes how we learn things, and particularly this is true for kids, and it may increase our superficiality in social relationships. What we're doing when we multitask is we split our attention. And every time we switch our attention from one thing to another, we use up glucose, which lowers the glucose center in our brain, our food, our sustenance. And when that center gets low, it releases our hormone, our adrenaline, cortisol. And that makes us ultimately feel overwhelmed and depleted because we are. When we're switching, we are not concentrating on either task particularly well, and you need a mental warm up to resume the suspended task. Medium multitasking decreases mental efficiency and, for kids in particular, can impair their ability to learn. When attention is divided, you can't integrate new information as well, and you aren't used to focusing on things for a shorter period. So let's talk for a minute about how we can prioritize. What does it mean to prioritize? Kimberly, I love that you're playing a game and cooking pasta while you're listening to me. Way to go. I probably wouldn't be so far behind myself. Um, I can't talk about what I don't struggle with, right? So there are two types of tasks. There are urgent tasks and important tasks. And if you have time and you can look up something called the Eisenhower matrix, this lays it out for you very well. Urgent tasks cause us to react immediately and stop whatever else we're doing and attend to these tasks. There's often a time pressure that's associated with them. Important tasks guide us towards our purpose and goals and reflect our life values, and they rely on planning, organizing, and initiation. So there are four quadrants. So I want you to think about this, that we have important over here and urgent here, and each of those is divided. So we have four quadrants: urgent and important, and these are crises. This is when we spend a lot of time in this quadrant, we become stressed and burned out. Our goal is to minimize our time spent in this urgent and important quadrant through schedules and organization. Then if we move over, the next one is not urgent and important. These are goals or planning. This is the desired quadrant of flow. And when you're in this quadrant, it's like you're riding a bike. You're staying on top of important things, you're making progress, and you feel calmer because you're dealing with issues before they arise. You're not in a crisis. Quadrant 3 are things that are not important but urgent. These are interruptions, activities that interrupt and steer us away from important tasks. When we're into quadrant 3, it feels like we're not getting anywhere. We're stuck, we're frustrated, we're stressed. We have to learn to say no to other people's interruptions in order not to be stuck in this quadrant. And quadrant 4 is the things that are not important and not urgent. And these are distractions. These are activities that distract us from the tasks at hand, and it's anything we do to waste time and avoid necessary work. And so this quadrant has to do with avoidance, procrastination, tardiness, and negative self-talk. And in order to get out of this quadrant, we have to increase our awareness of distractions and set limits with these activities. So I hope that's helpful as a little introduction, and I see many, many questions. So I'm just going to dive right in. If we're depleting our glucose, does that cause carb cravings? So when we deplete our glucose, it means that glucose is blood sugar, right? So our sugar goes down. You might crave carbs for sure, because you want to try to get it up as soon as you can, and often we think that carbs are going to do that. However, that actually isn't great for our bodies. You'd be better with some sort of protein snack. Lynn asks, how would you organize a menu for Christmas Eve and Christmas Eve day? Okay, so we're going to get right into the nitty gritty. So when you're organizing something, you have to ask yourself certain kinds of questions. What is my hope for this event? So particularly for Christmas Eve and Christmas Eve day, what are some things people like? Maybe ask people what they'd like, what they might want to bring, what they might want to help cook. And how can you have different things? Usually a menu has, appetizers, a main course, some delicious sides, and then some desserts. And I think that if you are struggling with creating a menu for a holiday, don't do it by yourself. That doesn't sound fun. When I host Thanksgiving, not this year, of course, because no one came, but when in the past, when I've hosted Thanksgiving or other holiday events, I talk to people. I'm like, what do you think we should make? What would be fun? What kind of theme do we want to have? I think that helps take the pressure off of you. It's very hard when you're a host to feel like, whoa, I got to do this all and I got to do it right and perfectly and make sure everyone's happy. Forget that. Involve other people so you can come up with something that makes sense. When you're organizing your menu, you lay out what you want to make a list of what you're going to need to buy at the store while you're looking at the menu, or take out the recipes so they're with the menu. Create a folder, of Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, so you can start to plan for yourself instead of being strung out. Make a list based on what the recipes say or what you'll need, and then talk to someone and go over it, so to make sure that you have whatever you've thought of. Consider beverages, flowers if you like to do that sort of thing. Um, Jennifer asks, before school, my 10-year-old can't figure out what he needs to get dressed before school. Eating, playing with anything that distracts him, picking on his sister. He doesn't need it doesn't need to happen as much as getting shoes and socks on. Any suggestions to help make the mornings go more smoothly? Well, that's a great question, Jennifer. So here's the thing. Some kids cannot pick out their clothes. They can't do it. And I think that we want to take out that figuring away from them. So I honestly have had several kids, many kids I've worked with, who get dressed at night in their clothes for the next day. They take their bath, they take their shower, they put on clean clothes, and they go to sleep. I mean, what really is the difference? And if they have their pants on and their t-shirt or their whatever, they are most of the way there. Or at least if they have their shirt on and their underwear, then they can just put their pants on. The other thing is, it might help if the clothes are not upstairs. If that doesn't work for you and he lays out the clothes, that you pick the clothes up and you take them downstairs, so he's getting dressed at the kitchen table while you're there, if you're there making breakfast. I think that if you could, have some kind of supervision, that would help. And you might want to create like a race. Okay, how long is it going to take you to get dressed this morning? Yesterday it took you 2 minutes. Today, can we beat that? If we can get it under a minute, then we're gonna earn something that you like. We're gonna go out. You'll go grocery shopping with me and get to pick something that you love to eat, or we'll spend extra time outside playing at the playground. So you can incentivize him in that way. The goal in those situations is to redirect back to the task at hand. So you want to make sure that the steps are very clear. And for 10-year-olds, you might want to say, like, you might want to map it out with a chart or something that he can refer to, like, okay, I have my socks on. What else do I need to do for the morning? Karen, I struggle to ask for help with prioritizing, and it's something my colleagues and boss have flagged as a problem. But to me, asking for help prioritizing strongly triggers RSD. I feel like I really should be able to do this myself, and it's stressful and humiliating to admit when I can't because I feel like a failure. Any tips for overcoming this? So here's what I want to say. Please don't be so hard on yourself. Everybody struggles with all kinds of things. I'm not great with time management. I have to really work hard to make sure I don't cram stuff in when I, and then overbook and then I'm running late. So if you need some help with prioritizing, um, the challenge that's getting in the way here is the negative conversation you're having with yourself. You're telling yourself you're inadequate or you're bad or you're a failure or something equally terrible because you can't do this yourself. And not everyone is good at planning and prioritizing. It's hard to prioritize because it's hard to determine what is urgent, what isn't urgent, what do you need to get to first. So, what I would consider is trying to ask for some assistance on something small first and actively having some things that you can say to yourself in that process, or letting the colleague who's going to help you know this is really hard for me to ask for help, and I'm very grateful. Um, so, thank you. Just right up front. And that way you can kind of, in some ways, desensitize yourself. Jane, I'm looking for your Facebook page. Could you please give me information? My Facebook is at capital DR Sharon Celine. Thank you. Kimberly, oh, I'm totally behind on all things, but I can't focus on some things without busying the rabid brain squirrel with something else. So yes, a lot of times for people with ADHD, there's this zzz that's going along, and that rabid brain squirrel. And so you need to do something while doing something else. I think that's okay. I think what I'm really talking about when I talk about multitasking is when you're doing several things and you can't do any of them particularly well or complete them. So what we want to do is, if you need to have that zzz taken care of in your brain with a fidget, or you're knitting while you're having a conversation, which is something I like to do, it might be helpful to say that to the person and say, here, I'm gonna do this and this while I'm doing it. But if you're trying, something small, you're doing something small, I'm knitting or I'm talking to you on the phone while I'm knitting, that's okay. That's different than I'm making dinner, I'm trying to help my kids with their homework, and I'm talking to my mother on the phone. That's a recipe for disaster. And so in those situations, cut something out. I'm making dinner and I'm available to answer questions about homework. It's too much to ask yourself to be on the phone at the same time. Jane, my son of 20 moved out of home into an apartment. He doesn't prioritize his rent and bills before spending on himself, and I'm worried he'll lose his home. Jane, that's a really good point. So, for a lot of young people, young adults with ADHD, what I recommend is that they have money. They have two accounts. So they have a savings account where their checks from their job go in, and then they have a transfer of some money into spending. And out of that savings account will be their cost of things like their rent or other bills are automatically debited, so that the spending account, the checking account, is what you have, and when that's gone, you can't actually transfer more. Like, to sit down and talk about how to do that, because the fact is that in continuing to transfer money, from your savings into your checking, you won't be able to pay your bills. So this is a safeguard. This is the money that you do not touch. This is the money that you touch. So let's talk about how much money you're going to need to touch every month that, allows you to have spending and then some, and then what you're going to keep aside and not touch, so you can save for things that matter to you. Like when the pandemic is over, and let's say you want to go to a concert or you want to go on a trip or do something fun with your friends, you'll have that money there. But you'll be saying no all day long. Right. So one of the things that's hard is that we allow people to interrupt us because we're nice. We want to help them. And what we have to do, I think, is set up a schedule where this is when I'm going to be available to talk to you. But in these moments, I need to work because I have to give my full focus to my work. And I think if you can set boundaries like that, then you'll be able to accomplish something. Maybe you set 15 minutes or 30 minutes at 10 and then another 30 minutes at noon. And the rest of the time you're doing your work. It's very difficult. I struggle with this myself. Or maybe you set 10 minutes every hour where you can, deal with those interruptions or distractions. But if we don't set boundaries about when we are not when we are not available, then we can't actually be there for ourselves and the tasks we have to do. Kimberly says, my biggest problem with my kid is getting her to focus when she doesn't want to. Well, of course, kids, interest stimulates motivation. And if they're not interested in the task, they're not going to get started. I'm working with someone right now who is in 8th grade, and he really struggles with motivation a lot. And he wants to do well at school, but he cannot bring himself to do things that he doesn't like. And he drifts off all the time. Medication hasn't been super helpful. He's very smart, and now it seems to me like he's depressed. So what we want to do when kids can't focus is to break tasks down into small chunks. What happens with procrastination is that the task at hand seems too big. And this is true for prioritizing as well. It's hard to do something that you know you have to do if it seems overwhelming. So, I'm going back to the person who wants to plan her Christmas Eve and Christmas Day menus. That's a big undertaking. I'd start with just one meal. Let's get Christmas Eve set. And then when that's all set and you've got your recipe and the things you want to get from the grocery store and you feel good about that, then you can move on to Christmas Day. But who wants to plan 2 meals back to back? It's too much. I don't think this can cause diabetes, thank Lynn. Jane, he doesn't really seem to understand and it causes issues. So your son is 20, but in some ways he's 17. So he probably doesn't understand. And in this day and age, all I can suggest is that you sit down with him for a limited period of time, or maybe go to the bank and have a meeting with someone at the bank where they explain to him how to help him have the money and the setup that he needs to be independent. He wants to be independent, and we want to nurture that independence. So that's where you want to join with him. You're not cramping his style. A lot of kids feel like, oh, my parents are just trying to control me. I wish they would leave me alone. But really, what you're trying to do is to make sure he stays independent. So if you can have that conversation with him alone, that's great. And if you can, see if there's someone who can help you mediate a few conversations about that, or just have a conversation maybe with someone at the bank. Jen, my 14-year-old has focus issues and her school suffers. A lot of kids who struggle with focus issues struggle with school, and one of the challenges of being online is that you can drift off in any way. With this boy that I'm working with, he's using this app called Stay Focused, FOCUSD. I think it's called. It's an app, and you have to basically, if you go on YouTube for more than 15 minutes, it shuts down. And so we want to use some different kinds of apps to help kids, limit their distractions online, because the screen is where we play. The screen is where we get information. The screen is where we hang out. We watch movies. And now we have to go to school. It's naturally tempting to go to other things in school when you're online. Hi, Johnny. Kay says, my son is really bad for obsession with one thing and his whole life around it. And right now it's puberty and a console game. So, kids with ADHD, and particularly kids who with ADHD who may also be on the spectrum, can hyperfocus, can really zero in on one thing. And when they're zeroing in on that one thing, the rest of the world sort of falls away. So we want to try to limit the amount of time that they're zeroed in on that one thing and broaden their base. Maybe he could be interested in magic cards. Maybe he could be interested in making music, something so it's a balanced diet, not only the game console, something else. And the only way that's probably going to happen is if you set up some limits, which he will of course push back on. So we want to set up times where he can earn his gaming, have gaming that he gets automatically, some gaming that he earns by doing an alternative activity. What are the deterring factors between urgent, important, and urgent? Great question, Paula. So the deterring factors. So since urgent is about time pressure, the deterring factors would be thinking you have more time than you actually do. And since urgent is about value, it would be thinking something isn't that valuable or worthy of your time and attention when it actually really is. And so we want to think about when we're considering urgent and important is how much time do I really have to do this? Um, how much value does this bring to me, or does it require, or does it have inherently? And we want to be able to be in that quadrant where things are important but they're not urgent, so they have value, they have meaning, we can set a goal, we can plan, we can work towards it, but we're not under the time pressure. It's the time pressure that freaks us out and stresses us out. um, John, I'm currently trying to run my landscape business, trying to get ready to build my house, have a 15-year-old who also has ADHD. Welcome, John. Any books I can read that may help? Um, so I'm not sure if you're looking for help for yourself with your landscape business. Of course, I'm going to shamelessly self-promote my book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew. And there are many other books as well that I'm sure that if you go onto the attitudemag.com resources page, you'll find. Kimberly says, what's hard for me is when there's a choice to make between fairly even weighted things that aren't high importance. Okay, so what you're saying is things are sort of the same. There's no high importance and there's no urgency. How do I choose them? So for me, when I am faced with that kind of choice, and what I would recommend for you is what is, if at all, the deadline for doing this? And what is your goal in accomplishing it? And what is your level of interest? If things are basically the same, but you could tolerate doing one more than the other, then go with that first. A lot of times for people with ADHD, it helps to just get going. And once you're going, then you can like do something and maybe even do something else because you're in a flow. That flow is what helps us get things done. Um, your Bud says, due to online schooling for COVID, schooling suffers greatly. He just doesn't care. So we talked about motivation recent this week. I did a webinar on Wednesday, so I would encourage you to look that up on motivating kids right now. Oh, kids are burned out. They have Zoom fatigue. They have online school fatigue. They miss their friends. They even miss their teachers. They miss the whole package, right? And so they're not super motivated online. And so if your child is really struggling at school, I encourage you to meet with the school to set up some program, some plan, some extra support to get him the assistance he needs. Most likely he needs to break down his assignments into smaller chunks so he can do some things and feel a sense of accomplishment. Also, incentives would be very helpful for him. You do this, you earn that. You need to put the have do's before the want to's. This is very important, particularly for kids right now who are struggling with a lack of motivation. What resources are there to help with focus issues for ADD? Jen asks. I'm going to turn this over to Annie, who is probably going to leave us in a minute, but there are a number of resources to help with focus issues. I think on Attitude Mag, what I want to say is that focus is like a spotlight of attention. It's where we put our attention, where we're noticing things. And I like to ask kids where your spotlight is right now. What are you focused on? And what do you need to be focused on? What happens is kids drift off, adults drift off, and then you don't notice that you're adrift until you come back. And when you come back is when you realize, oh my goodness, I've been, out to lunch in my mind. Right? So we want to have cues. There are different kinds of technological things, notifications that you can use on your computer, things that flash across the screen. Check those out. Paula asks, how do you know if you're being perfectionistic or needing to achieve this standard to get on the top of things in the long term? So I'm not sure about the answer to that question because I don't fully understand the question. So what you're wondering is it perfectionistic, or are you holding too high standards for yourself if you're trying to get on top of everything that's in the long term? And I guess my answer would be probably not. It's how, how are you spacing things out for yourself? That you want to do things that are right in front of you, and then the things after that. That's most helpful. Janina says, my phone supports multitasking. I have to play something while listening. Okay, good to know. It sounds like while you're listening to your phone, you can play a game. And that's kind of what I was talking about, even with knitting, with that zzz in your head. Um, Jessica asks, techniques to keep from becoming the to-do list from becoming obsessive. I hear her on this one. It seems like more time making lists than achieving accomplishments. Right. So a lot of times, and I am so guilty of this. I mean, I'll show you my list here. It's ridiculous. This is a ridiculous, hold on, let me put it here so you can see it. This is a ridiculous list, you see? And I should not do that, because essentially what I do for myself and what I teach other people to do is you do a brain dump of whatever is your task for the day or the week. And then you take those things and then you make a second list of what actually you can do, of the order that you can do those things in. And you work from that smaller list. Because when I look at this list, I want to leave the office. I'm just like, forget it. Who can do all those things? That's ridiculous. So it's hard because even if I set something up for myself that I want to do, I may not get to it, and then it has to roll over. And the things that roll over are the things that are not urgent and not important, but would be good for me to do. And I have to become okay with that, just like you have to become okay with that. So your to-do list becomes obsessive when you think you have to accomplish everything on it in a certain amount of time, instead of breaking it down into smaller pieces. Like, this is today. What I'm going to be able to do is go to the post office, have my doctor's appointment, have my 3 meetings, and then I'm going to help my kids with their homework. That's a realistic of what I'm able to do. Christopher Lewis, I seem to be completely incapable of succeeding in anything but the most simple jobs. I'm sorry. I am just now coming to the end of another high quality job that I have failed at. I drive my wife crazy when I mess things up. I am really reluctant to seek professional attention because of the industry I am in. Well, Christopher, I hear your reluctance, but I actually want to encourage you to please get some professional help. Repeated failures just eat away at our self-esteem and who we are, and you deserve better than that. And right now, you're struggling. So get some help. Maybe consider some medication, but you need someone to assist you to redirect how you're approaching things and what you're approaching. Kimberly, think of it as being resourceful, of being resourceful as a skill rather than admission or criticism of inadequacy. Exactly. When you're asking for help, it's resourceful rather than inadequate. Um, let's see, Harlan. One thing I did to become more comfortable to ask for help at work was position it as a mentoring chance for my boss. I love this, Harlan. Me more than me not knowing, starting with, since you've been here for X years, what have you found to be most helpful with X? That's fantastic, because what Harlan is showing us is how to flip something on its head. Instead of I am terrible, I don't know what to do, I'm just a loser. What he's saying is he's going to people and asking them, to lean into them as mentors. You've been here a while. What do you do about this? And that makes someone feel good. And it also makes someone, because you are telling them that they understand something, but it also makes them feel good because you are, you are offering them the opportunity to be generous, to be kind, and that kind of generosity helps people feel good about themselves. So I think a lot of times when people are afraid to ask for help, they're worried about burdening the other person. What Harlan's pointing out is actually asking for help gives someone an opportunity, if it's done, in a kind way, to actually show up for you. And that can make them feel worthwhile in a way that you may not have expected. Dina, I can relate to the woman who has trouble asking for help. Unfortunately, by the time we reach adulthood, we've been the recipients of many negative messages from parents, teachers, and they become part of our internal monologue. Absolutely. And so our job when we are adults, with whatever negative internal messages we have, is to come up with a counter statement. So one counter statement, what for me, I could say, I have trouble, I'm late to a lot of things. I stink at time management. Or I can say, I love to do a lot of things and I'm competent, so I want to get a lot done, and I sometimes overestimate my capability within a certain amount of time. That's what I'm trying to lean toward, so that I don't hate myself for when I'm late, but say, okay, try to, not cram as much. It's a directive as well as an affirmation. So what could you say to yourself, you know, to counteract the dominant negative message that you're living with? And if you have any suggestions, please put them in the chat, because I'm sure all of the other participants would love to hear what you are all saying to yourselves to help counteract that negativity, that negative conversation in your heads. Tanu asked, what was the name of the quadrant system? The Eisenhower matrix. And you can also Google urgent and important matrix. And actually, somebody put that down there. Thank you. Samantha, I'm a terrible procrastinator and a perfectionist. Wow. Those two are really hard to hold at the same time. I will brain dump everything on paper, but tackling those things is a different story. How can I let go of the list and allow others to check things off without freaking out that they aren't doing it right, or going back and fixing what they do? Example, reorganizing dishes put away wrong or toys in the wrong place. So this is so great that you said this, Samantha. Thank you. I really appreciate it. So there are three types of procrastination. I think I've talked about this. There's perfectionism procrastination, which is I have to get it right or I'm not going to do it at all, or I'm just going to keep putting it off because if I can't get it right, I don't want to do it. There's avoidance procrastination. Boy, I really dislike doing this, so I'm going to put it off as long as possible. Or this thing seems so enormous and impossible to do, I'm going to put it off so I don't have to try. And then the third type is productive procrastination, where I'm going to do other things that need to get done, but I'm not going to do the main thing because it seems too big, or I don't like it, or I can't do it right. So it's kind of a combination. Now, when people are perfectionists and they have ADHD, let's ask ourselves some questions. Why? What's that about? And that goes back to what someone else had said about criticism. If you have ADHD and you've been criticized a lot for the ways that you've messed up, the things that you've forgotten, all of those negative things, you are actually going to want to make sure that whatever you do is right. This is people who are perfectionistic, to try to avoid a problem later on. Only the difficulty with that is it doesn't work, because you can't do everything for everyone at all times. Some things have to be let go of. And so the question I would ask is, what difference does it make if the dishes aren't exactly put away the way you think they should be, or the toys aren't put back the way you think they should be? By setting a standard of how things should be, you're making your life much harder and more complicated. The issue for a lot of people who struggle with similar challenges is actually tolerating the discomfort that things aren't in your control enough. I worked with a woman who lived with a partner, and she would not only do the laundry, but she would fold all his laundry and put it in his drawer a certain way because that's the right way to do it. And she was not happy in this relationship, and nor was he, and they ended up breaking up. And in her next relationship, we had worked a lot on this issue, and one of the main challenges was not to do that. And that was a little hard for her. But through talking, through realizing that control was a way to manage her anxiety, this perfectionism was a way to manage her anxiety and to try to make sure that she was in control of things that she really wasn't. So we try to control the things we can, right? And sometimes that can go a little bit off the rails. We want to keep it within, what's a realistic set of boundaries. Tanu, you can watch this. Yes, it's recorded later. Um, this is why we order Indian takeout on Christmas Eve and eat leftovers on Christmas. Kimberly, you are making me laugh. Thank you. Okay. Christopher, urgent equals deadline. I write a time scale on that access. Import is about the seriousness of the outcome. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing, Christopher. K, we've got time limits on everything, but then he just talks about it constantly, role playing it with his younger sister. He's also on the bench about his sexuality. So, I'm curious what your question is. If you could, Kay, ask your question, then I could try to address that. And thank you for your sharing. Heather, what is your opinion on Irlen syndrome? My ADHD daughter was diagnosed with it, but I read that colored overlays and glasses don't work. Um, Honestly, I don't know. I've never heard of Irlen syndrome, so I'm sorry about that. And I can't give you a response immediately. I'd have to look it up. If you want to email me, I'm happy to try to respond to your question. Laura, making a list of things to do helps me make a plan and prioritize things in life. It can be a relief, particularly for people with ADHD who struggle with working memory challenges or slower processing speed. When things are on that paper, you don't have to try to remember all the things that are going on. And in our very busy lives right now, that stresses our brains. And of course, when our brains are stressed, we don't remember things. Kristen, can occupational therapy help my 15-year-old daughter to learn executive functioning skills like organization and time management? She takes Adderall for her ADHD, but is struggling more than ever with these skills. I have tried to show her how to put school assignments on a calendar, but that has not helped. Um, it's perhaps occupational therapy can help your daughter with that. I think she might do better with an executive functioning skills coach or somebody at school who can work with her. If she has ADHD, she's probably, I don't know if where you live, Kristen, but she's probably mandated for some services. Here in the United States, that would be true, and also in Canada. And so that would mean that there would be an aide available to help her with this, or a learning strategies teacher. Amy, my 12-year-old has ADHD and has recently been throwing away his meds. Yuck. How do I handle it? Do I let him come off meds or try different ones? We have tried a few. Does he find the meds helpful, Amy? And if he's not finding them helpful, then let's go back to the prescriber and find out why. Or let's talk about, and I did this with one of my clients recently, you take your focus pill during the week when you have to focus at school. On the weekend, you can have a break. So you come up with an agreement that it's not all the time every day, but it's certain times when you have to focus and not others. LD McAaron, hi. Um, Qualifying for an IEP for an ADHD is a challenge. It is an invisible disability. If they do need extra supports in school, it's a challenge for parents to help advocate for that invisible disability. It would be great if children with these invisible disabilities had more understanding and supports. I agree. I 100% agree. Um, I guess my question, Amy, also is has he telling you that he's throwing them out, or is he throwing them out and sneaking the throwing out? In which case, that requires, a family conversation, a collaborative conversation. Why are you throwing your medication out? Is it not helping you? What's your relation? What's his relationship to his medication? Does he feel bad about taking it? Maybe he thinks he doesn't need it, but his schoolwork may show differently. Tanu, I don't recommend a planner in particular. That's not something that I do. Amy says just that he doesn't feel like taking them. He's never had side effects except his hunger declines from them. We value his opinion about being on meds, but when he's off, he really struggles in class. Right. So that's why that would go back to my suggestion, which is you take your meds during the days when you have to go to class. You don't take them when you don't. And that would give him, I think, a little bit of a reprieve and a sense of autonomy. Janina, I can't make to-do lists because they cause me anxiety. I still need to get things done and I keep forgetting them without lists. Do you have any advice on how to solve this? So, Janina, I understand that lists make you anxious, and particularly these kind of lists. There are a number of apps on your phone that can help you with that. So you maybe make a list and then you can transfer some to some different days. But I think it's really helpful to do a brain dump of what is on your mind so you don't have to hold on to it. But then narrow the field of the things you have to do so your list is not, you know, crippling you. Okay. Tamika, I'm in Australia and the planner that you like. Okay. Is it possible to have all three types of procrastination? Absolutely. Um, Mina emphasizes the fact that people have all made their own discoveries on how to handle these very common issues. Yes, this is a very common issue, and everybody is working on coming up with their own strategies. Samantha, control issues and military upbringing totally answers the need to have everything a certain way. Thanks for your insight. You are so welcome. And a lot of times, my father served in the Korean War, and he used to say everything has a place, and it had to be in the place. And sometimes no, like sometimes I just want to have my stack of my mail, but actually he's kind of right. It's just we don't want to be rigid about that place. Like the dishes go in the cabinet. How they go in the cabinet, maybe not so important. The toys go in the toy bin. How they're in the toy bin, not so important. You see? So I think there has to be some type of flexibility around that. Statement. Okay, so I have some people responding with their statements. Thank you. Thank you so much. Mina, I'm working towards this positive goal. Love it. Good enough is a beautiful thing. Amen. And then those were two great ones. Thank you. I tell myself a few. I'll share them. I say I'm only one person. I also say I can only do so much, and this is what I can do right now. Lynn, I don't think insurances will ever cover ADHD coaches because I just don't think we struggle as clinicians to have them cover us. But there are clinicians who know about ADHD, and I think Attitude, you also might want to check CHAD or ADA, which are organizations about ADHD for some recommendations. Hey, Bud, welcome back. Okay, question to the above comment is the obsessive behaviors you said about limited time, but which we have in place, but he finds a way around it by role playing, talking, etc. So what he's showing you is that he doesn't like those limits, or maybe that he needs more time to goof around within the limit. So I would have a talk with him about why do you think when you have a limit, you actually push it to its very edge so that you're more stressed in the final moment. I mean, a lot of kids like to be stressed in the final moment because it puts the fire under them to do it and they can really buckle down. But that's that cortisol, that's that adrenaline. So I would ask him, why is he struggling with these limits, and does he need an extra 2 minutes in whatever the limits are so he can have goof around time within that limit. Bud says, my boy hasn't taken his meds since March 17th. He admits it helps him focus, especially on football Fridays. And he says, because that's me. So I think that when kids are not taking their meds, there's something else going on for them. They're trying to exert their independence in some way. And I would sit down and talk with them about other ways that they could show us that they're, developing into a mature a child or teen, and where they can exert that kind of self-control and impetus that in a safe way rather than in a way that's actually self-sabotaging. Feel excused with trying to find other distractions. Often feel like I'm failing him. You are not failing him, Kay. You're just struggling. And I don't know if you said you feel excused or exhausted. I think maybe I'm guessing exhausted, and I can understand that. You're welcome, LD. You're